Alright, so a little while ago we got a stat block for Vecna, the Archlich on D&D Beyond, and I did a long video on my thoughts on the stat block and what I thought was maybe not so great about it. And you had a lot of comments on that video telling me how you maybe agreed or disagreed or your sort of input on how you would have made the stat block. And I figured that since I'm preparing to run Vecna for my players, that I would go in and make the sort of changes that I think would make Vecna the Archlich a more compelling foe. So that's essentially what this video is about, me going through the Vecna stat block, rearranging some stuff, redoing some stuff, enhancing the stat block, at least in my opinion, and making it better and more aligned with what I believe that Vecna should be, and make a monster that is, in my opinion, more fun for the characters to play against. Before we begin, I also want to note that my core philosophy when I'm going in and enhancing or changing official stuff is that I'll try to keep it as close to the original as possible. So I'm not going to do a complete makeover of Vecna. I'm not going to make a completely different monster. I'm going to take the building blocks that we've been given and I'll sort of tweak them, change them a bit, and try to make a more compelling monster out of them. So in lieu of that, I want to first highlight what I think were some of the major issues with the Vecna stat block that we got. So looking through it, the first thing that I thought was a bit off is that we have a challenge rating 26 creature, but it only has an armor class of 18 and 272 hit points. Now granted, Vecna does have immunity to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from non-magical attacks, and he is immune to a lot of conditions, and he also has some counterspell stuff we'll get into, but even with all those things, he is quite fragile. Even if he can heal himself at points, he is still starting out at a very low amount of hit points that will put him in danger in that first round of combat, because if you're going up against 4 20 level characters, you need more cushion than 272 hit points, because you can't assume that they don't have magical weapons or that they can't sort of get some hits in before it's Vecna's turn to try and heal back up again. It's also very weird in my opinion that his intelligence is lower than his wisdom and that it's only +6. I know +6 is a lot if you're a character, but if you are an immortal Archlich, the king of liches, the perhaps greatest wizard in the multiverse, 22 intelligence is not impressive. Another thing that I thought was sort of wonky with the Vecna stat block is the reliance on using Afterthought. It's a core feature of Vecna stat block that he makes these two attacks with Afterthought, and not only isn't it really that powerful, it's also a melee weapon, and I don't like my liches going into melee if I can avoid it. So that's another thing that I think is sort of off about the stat block. Beyond that, I'm not a huge fan of the Rotten Fate feature, not just because it's a redo of Finger of Death that is uncountable. I can actually see how a lich would be able to sort of create a Finger of Death that is not a spell, but sort of just a feature of the monster, so I can accept that. But I don't like that it instantly kills a character, effectively taking them out of combat, and 96 damage is a whole lot even at level 20. You can take out some squishy characters with that if you've just given them a bit of damage beforehand, and then you are, well, basically removing them from the combat, and that can leave a player feeling, well, kind of bored if they die in the first 2 rounds of a 7-round long combat, for example. So that's also something I'm not a huge fan of. One of the more egregious issues with the stat block is also Vecna's spellcasting. As you can see, he doesn't have a whole lot of spells, and I think that's okay. We don't want to clutter the stat block with a ton of useless spells that he's never going to use, but he really doesn't have any great spells on here. Its Dominate Monster is perhaps the only spell that I think is really, really good on his stat block, something that he would definitely be using. The other stuff is mostly situational, and a Lightning Bolt or Invisibility, Animate Dead, stuff like that is not going to do a whole lot in a 20th level combat. Then there's also the teleport thing, which I think is perhaps fun, but it's also a bit weird that if he doesn't get to take this bonus action, or if he doesn't use it to teleport close to a creature, he can't regain those hit points. So this is his main source of regeneration, but it's something that will probably put him at more risk and maybe even not be possible to do at some point. So that's also an issue that I'm aware of. And then finally we come to the biggest issue in my opinion with the Vecna stat block, and that is that he doesn't have legendary actions, but he has these triple reactions. He can take 3 reactions in a round, and he can use those reactions to perform a really powerful counterspell, which he's likely to succeed. And he can also use this Fell Rebuke, which is a lot less impressive in my opinion. My issue with these reactions are twofold. First off, I think he really should have legendary actions and not just a whole lot of reactions, because there are spells, features, stuff out there that can negate reactions really easily. And if you take away these reactions from Vecna, he has 0 defensive potential. He won't be able to survive or stop people from casting spells, and that's something that will very quickly see him going down. The other thing is that it also completely shuts down spellcasters. If you can counterspell 3 spells per round, it's very unlikely that the characters are going to get many spells off. Of course, he can fail this intelligence check. It's not impossible for him to do so, but even so, it's not the most fun way to have a combat in my opinion. And I also don't like that he has an uncountable counterspell, because unlike his Finger of Death feature, I don't see why his counterspells should be impossible to counter. So that's my main issues with the Vecna Statblock. Now we also need to consider the other stuff he gets and also the environment that he fights in. So the battle with Vecna is basically going to take place in a 80 feet long and 30 feet wide sanctum with a ceiling that is 60 feet high. That leaves enough room to fly. It's a quite long battlefield, but it's not very wide. There won't be that many places to hide, I think. We also know that the walls are made of zombies. There's some grapple checks, stuff like that. That's all right. One important feature here is that spells that restore hit points to a living creature only restore half as many hit points. That's going to be something that the characters will feel if they try to heal during the combat. Not generally something characters do too much, but in a very pitched battle it can be something that is really important. We also learned that when combat begins, the tower erupts in green necrotic flames that deal damage every turn unless you succeed on a dexterity saving throw. With a 15 DC, any dexterity base character or any character that has proficiency dexterity is going to probably succeed on that every turn, but some characters will be taking around 14 necrotic damage every turn, so that's also something to bear in mind. Vecna also has lair actions. One can summon a shadow per character. Those are really nasty because the shadows are going to go in and take away the character's strength, and if you lose all your strength you die, and there are a lot of 8 strength characters out there, so that's something that is really going to have an impact. Innovation, not the greatest spell. It doesn't do a whole lot in my opinion, and it only lasts for 1 round, so it's not something that I'm seeing as hugely effective. And then you have this Mournful Dead feature that can deal some cold damage in a 20-foot radius and reduce movement speed by 15 feet. It also does do half damage on a success, so that's something to also take into account. So his lair actions are not bad. I am actually not going to change those. I think they're fine. I think they'll do what they need to, and especially shadow play is going to be quite effective. A lot has also been made of the fact that he has the Book of Wild Darkness, and the Book of Wild Darkness can do some stuff. It can provide some beneficial features, stuff like that. You could go in and buff up Vecna by giving the Book of Wild Darkness a lot of beneficial properties that maybe makes him more defensively capable, stuff like that. That's not the route I'm going to go here. I'm just going to put the Book of Wild Darkness to the side, because you have to remember that the characters are going to get that book afterwards. So if we make that hugely powerful, it may be sort of an issue. So that's not something I'm going to touch a whole lot on. I'm going to focus on Vecna's Statblock, and then you can decide if you're going to give him the Book of Wild Darkness and give that some beneficial properties that will buff him even further. Alright, with that introduction out of the way, I have taken the Vecna Statblock and I've ported it into InDesign, which is a software we use to make our Dungeons & Dragons or 5th edition books. And I've just basically copied everything in here. So this is Vecna Statblock as it is presented on D&D Beyond. And what I'm going to do now is just go through and make the changes that I think should be made. Now the first change I'm going to make is pretty easy. I'm just going to take Vecna's Constitution and we'll put that up to, let's say, 22. And that'll give him an additional 2 hit points per hit die, so that's 64 hit points more, so that'll be 336 hit points, if I'm not mistaken. I think it'll look like this. 336, that'll give him, it'll give him more beef, it'll make him a bit more beefy. I think we can do better than that. I think we can go up and say, all right, you're gonna have 4d d8, which means he's getting 240 additional hit points on top. which comes out to 180 plus 240, 420 hit points. Some of you Redditors may get excited about that number. So I think that's a decent base. I think it's a lot more likely to be sustainable than what he had before. As for his armor class, I think that we can do 20 here and be a bit more satisfied with that. It's still going to be decently easy for a 20 level paladin or fighter with a +1 weapon, for example, to hit him. They'll probably have around +12, +13 to hit, but it's not going to make it trivial. It's going to be a 50-50 or maybe 60-40 roll. So I think that's a bit better. Next thing I want to do here is that I'll of course take his intelligence up. So we'll give that a 26 instead, and that'll give him a +8 to intelligence. I think that's a lot more in line with what I would expect an artist to have, and that also means that we have to, of course, improve his constitution and his intelligence saving throws as well. We can go through and increase his skill checks as well. I don't expect these skills to come in play too much during the combat, but you know, why not? Another thing that I'm going to change up here is that I'll put in some regeneration. So putting in this regeneration feature will make it so that Vecna regains 20 hit points at the start of his turn, but he doesn't regain those hit points if he takes damage from an artifact, and he only dies if he starts his turn with 0 hit points. Now, if you know that the character is going to have that sort of cast, which is an artifact that is of course connected to the lore about Vecna, you could put in this extra sentence that says, and doesn't regenerate, so it's only if he's taking damage from the sort of cast and is at 0 hit points that he's actually going to die. That's going to make it a lot more, it gets more intertwined with the lore where you need to have that sort of cast, the only sword that can destroy Vecna to actually put him down. And of course it also just makes him more durable overall if he's gonna get back 20 hit points at the start of every turn. Now is 20 hit points enough? We're going to give him some opportunities to heal a bit more also, so he's not only going to rely on those 20 hit points per turn, but they are going to make a difference over 4, 5, 6, 7 rounds of combat. So moving on down the stat block, we have Afterthought, of course, which my issue with Afterthought is simply that it's not very effective, and he's sort of reliant on using it because he can only cast a spell or use Flight of Dame, run Fate, and then he makes 2 attacks with Afterthought. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make Afterthought more of an Afterthought, and I'll say he can then make 1 attack with Afterthought, and then we're going to leave it at that because we're going to give him legendary actions that will enable him to do more, so it's fine that he only has that single attack with Afterthought. We can move on to Flight of the Damned, which is basically just a really wide cone of darkness and stuff, spectral entities, constitution saving throw. On a failed saving throw, creature takes blah blah necrotic damage and is frightened of Vecna for 1 minute. My issue with this particular feature isn't exactly how it functions. I think it's fine. I also think it's fine that creature can be frightened again, but I think it's a bit weird that we get a constitution saving throw against being frightened. And I also think it's bad that so many of Vecna's features are going to rely on constitution. So in my opinion, I think this would be better if it had a different saving throw, and wisdom is a really overly used saving throw. So maybe we can say that it's an intelligence because these are flying illusory entities. So you gotta sort of figure out or be able to wrap your mind around that they're not real, and then you don't take necrotic damage because so much of what Vecna does deals necrotic damage. We're gonna say psychic damage and then keep the rest of the stat block as it is. We could of course add a line that if you have true sight and can see through illusions, you're not affected. That may be a good line to add, so we can just say that a creature that can see through illusions is immune to this feature. This might not be the correct wording. We're not going to go in here and sort of fine-tune the wording. I will publish this stat block for free afterwards, where I'll make sure to update the wording if I go back and see, okay, we need to twist this a little. This is just to show you the point of the stat block, and the point here is that we want this to be intelligence, which is a really difficult saving throw, and we want it to be psychic damage. Another thing we should be aware of when we have changed his constitution and his intelligence is that this may affect his abilities as well. So we could see that with a 22 intelligence saving throw, this ability was actually tied to his intelligence before, because you'd calculate 8 plus 8, which is just the baseline, which is 16, plus the plus 6 he had in intelligence. So we should actually also buff this up to 24. I think that's fine. It's not a very damaging feature, and Frightened is a pretty easy condition to be resistant to or immune to or have advantage against. Then we have the Rotten Fate feature, which is this increased, enhanced Finger of Death, and my issue here was, of course, that it can just kill a character and then the character can't be revived easily. It just comes back as a zombie and it's under Vecna's control, and that's very boring for the player to just be taken out of the combat. So what I've done here is that I've gone in and removed the part where it just becomes a zombie when it's dead. Instead, a humanoid reduced to 0 hit points dies, and if it's still dead at the start of the next turn, so if no one comes in and casts Resurrection or Revivify or some other magic like that to get that character back on its feet, it rises as an undead creature under Vecna's control, so much like a zombie, except that it regains half its hit points maximum and has the statistics that it normally would have. It still has its spell slots, class features, proficiencies, all that stuff, and the only thing that's really wiped out is its personality and alignment, and that it now obeys Vecna's telepathic commands. So it basically becomes a zombie servant to Vecna that still has the character statistics. Now this does two things, obviously. First off, it makes Vecna a whole lot more dangerous because he can turn a party member into a minion of his, which is really, really strong. And it also makes sure that that player actually gets to still participate in the combat, because now they are, well, just a minion under Vecna's control. As the DM, when I'm running this, I would not sort of give instructions, you need to attack that, only if the character playing that creature doesn't know what it would do under Vecna's control. You can go in and say you should do exactly that, otherwise you can let the character just figure out how it would best try to defeat its teammates. So this becomes a really, really dangerous feature and something that can really mess up the players or the party, because they're going to have to fight one of their own, which is an undead zombie. So more fun for the player, I would hope, that goes down instead of just being out of the combat, and a lot more dangerous. We do get a caveat here that the creature can be returned to its living form with a Wish spell or a greater restoration spell cast at 8 level higher. That's just to give some outs to get that character back. I would probably also allow for similar magic to work. So you can have a healing spell also work. You can have divine intervention, a cleric's high level feature also work, stuff like that. Let the players be creative, and if they figure out, let's try and do remove curse at 7th level, just let it work. It's fine. The important thing here is that they have to spend some resources to get their friend back on their side of the aisle, so to speak. It's also something that I would let the characters know that they can do. If they sort of ask, okay, what are we going to do? Or you have that intelligent wizard character in the party, let them roll an intelligence check to sort of figure this out, and a arcana check to realize what's going on here. How can we end it? How can we prevent it? So you could put in whatever sort of mitigating features you have here, and in the updated version I may have added some stuff to here, but the point is, well, that Vecna can make a minion out of a character. Moving on, we get the spell list, and as I mentioned, I don't think this spell list is that impressive. So one thing I think we can put on there is a time stop spell, because that's gonna, well, give him something really epic to do. Suddenly time stops and wait, where's Vecna going? He's regenerating with his regenerate feature and maybe putting some buffs back on himself, stuff like that. And then we'll also give him a delayed blast fireball, because that's just too much fun with time stop to sort of leave a delayed blast fireball waiting for the characters as they come back to. So I've gone into D&D Beyond and I've sorted the 7th, 8th and 9th level spells to take a look at what we have to work with. We already have delayed blast firewall on there, so that's fine. I don't think that any of these. Darkstar is really, really powerful, but it's another con save, and I want to maybe go for something that has a more interesting save. Could be a charisma save, stuff like that. So if we look around here, we can get a Feeble Mind. Is not a bad spell to put on there. Mass Polymorph, and I think that's a really fun one. So we'll want to do Mass Polymorph, as well, because just trying to polymorph all of the party into small beasts seems like a very Vecna thing to do. And he can also get a, let's have a look here and see what we can find. Plane Shift, he already has that. Ravenous Voids, which I think is the one that pulls creatures in. deals some force damage. I think that's a fine spell. It's, well, his third 9 level spell, but again, he is Vecna, so why not? And Reverse Gravity is one of my favorite spells. It's always really fun. Not likely he's going to use it. It is concentration, so it's sort of, well, not going to be the biggest impact we're going to have here, but it's something that's fun. It's a dexterity saving throw, so it's something he might throw out there if he needs to do so. Tether Essence is binding 2 creatures together. It's an Explorer's Guide to Wildmount spell. I really like that one as well, so I think that we're going to put that in as another 7 level spell. Basically, it just ties 2 creatures together, so if one creature takes damage, the other creature takes the same damage, stuff like that. Really, really nasty spell if both creatures fail their saving throw, which with a spell save DC of 24, there's a decent chance that they're going to do. So with these spells on the stat block, I think we get something that is a lot more impressive. Another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say that his Dispel Magic is always cast as a 5th level spell, because that just makes it more likely to succeed, and I think that he would use a 5th level spell slot for it if he had spell slots. So with these spells on here, I think that he gets a lot better. He has some more options beyond just using Dominate Monster. He can use that time stop to set some nasty stuff up, or to just recuperate a bit, get some healing in. He can use the Mass Polymorph to take creatures out, same with Reverse Gravity. He has more options spell-wise. Alright, so moving on, we have Vile Teleport, which is this teleport where he can teleport close, deal some psychic damage to creatures he lands near, and he regains 80 hit points. Now, we already gave Vecna regeneration, so I don't think he needs to heal another 80, especially not with the buff to his hit points as well. So what we're going to do instead is that we say that instead of just regaining 80 hit points, he will regain 10 hit points per creature that takes this damage. So for each creature that takes this damage, Vecna regains 10 hit points. So it's not 80 anymore, it's only 10 per creature. So he goes in, standing into 2 creatures, he's going to get 20 hit points. Is that good enough? I don't think so. Let's say 20 hit points per creature he deals damage to. That makes it more effective and more likely that he will get some actual hit points back from. Now we get down to his reactions, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove this line here. He's not going to have 3 reactions anymore. I think it's not fun for the spellcasters to just get counterspelled every time. But what I am going to do is I'm going to change Dredge counterspell a bit and actually make it a bit better. So what we've done here is going in and actually make it a counterspell, not an uncountable counterspell. He's actually casting counterspell. He's casting it as a 6th level spell, and that means that any spell of 6th level lower is just going to get instantly cancelled. And if the spell is 7 level or higher, he's going to have to make that intelligence check to see if he can counter it. Now, the thing that putting it at 6th level does is that the characters, if they want to counterspell Vecna's counterspell, they're going to have to do so at a really high level spell slot. You're not going to have that many 6, 7, 8 or 9 level spell slots. So if you're going to use those to counterspell Vecna's counterspell, well, then you have to really sacrifice a resource that you would otherwise need. You could go 7 for this. Maybe I will in the updated version, because you really want it to be difficult to counterspell Vecna's spell. In effect, if they use something that is lower, try to counterspell any of Vecna's spells or stuff like that, he's going to have that +8 to intelligence, which is going to make it really, really difficult for characters to counterspell him. Usually they'll have +5, so they will be at an instant disadvantage at counterspelling him. And of course, this makes Vecna a whole lot weaker against spellcasters, but what Vecna does have going for him now is that he has that extra hit points. He still has those resistances up here, and we're going to do another thing, and that is we're going to give him magic resistance, which just means that Vecna has advantage on saving throws against spells and other magical effects. So even if they get the spells off, it's like that he's going to succeed against them, or at least not take the full effect of the spell. So in my opinion, this sort of makes up for it and makes it so that spellcasters are still not going to have an easy time getting at Vecna, but at least they're going to be able to do something. They're not just going to be sidelined in the combat, and I think that's an important point. I think that it's also important that we say within 60 feet of him that is casting a spell, so he has the normal range for counterspell, because that's only fair. Other creatures have to abide by that range. Vecna should as well. It also stops him from just going in and dread counterspelling everything the character does as they go through the tower with his scrying spell, because he could potentially just use scrying, see where the characters are, regardless of the range between him and the characters. He can just counterspell them to the scrying. Stuff like that. We're gonna avoid that by simply putting in a 60 feet range on it. And there's the Fell Rebuke reaction, which is sort of just dealing some necrotic damage, and then he teleports away 30 feet. I think we can also improve that, so I'm just going to quickly do that. So what we've done here is that instead of just having him teleport away after taking the damage and dealing a bit of damage, which can be effective, repositioning him a bit, we're going to give him a beefed up shield spell. So this is not a spell, it can't be countered, which is intentional for this one. And it's a shield of necrotic energy, so it works like shield. You gain +5 bonus to AC until the start of his next turn, including against the triggering attack. But while he has the shield, any creature that misses on an attack against Vecna takes 10 necrotic damage and must succeed on a Constitution saving throw, or have disadvantage on attack rolls, ability checks, and saving throws using strength or dexterity until the end of his next turn. So this basically means that if he puts up this Fell shield and you miss your attack because of it, you're going to have a bad time until the end of your next turn if you are a melee character. And this puts it more in line with the Dread counterspell, because otherwise I wouldn't see him using Fell Rebuke that much. He'll just wait around to use counterspell to counter the really dangerous spells. With this, he can really set melee characters back by gaining that +5 bonus to AC, and also potentially damaging them and taking some of their powers away until the end of their next turn. Alright, the final thing we're going to do is that we're going to go in and give Vecna those legendary actions. We took away his multiple reactions, so of course we need to give him something else in return. So I've dispensed with the boilerplate. It just says Vecna can take 3 legendary actions. I want to keep this stat block short enough to be on a single page. I think you know how legendary actions work. He can take 3 of them between his own turn and his next turn, and he can only take 1 action per turn and only at the end of another creature's turn. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put Afterthought on there and just say that as a single legendary action, Vecna makes an attack with Afterthought. So he can get in 3 more licks if he wants to between combat. I don't think he's going to do it that often, but he can do it. We're also going to put in Vile Teleport, which of course has the option to move him around on the battlefield and also regain hit points. I would say that if we have Vecna regaining 20 hit points every time he uses this teleport, we probably need to make it 2 actions, so we can take this down to 10 hit points again and say, alright, Vecna uses Vile Teleport. He can actually jump around 3 times and potentially get up to that 80 hit points he would normally get, but he's expending a lot of his legendary actions to do so if that's what he wants to do. We'll also put in Spellcasting, which is just Vecna casts an at-will spell. There may be a more correct wording for that. We'll take a look at that. But basically this means that, oops, let's just correct it. Alright, cast an at-will spell. So that means that he can use Animate Dead, Detect Magic, Dispel Magic, Fly, Lightning Bolt, Mage Hand. I think we can probably put some more spells on there if we wanted to. Let's say we'll have Hold Person on there as well, because that's just a fun spell. I don't think Mage Hand is gonna be very relevant, so let's just take that off. We'll also put Tasha's Mind Whip on there, because that's a really nasty spell that can be super detrimental to the characters. If we wanted to have another legendary action on here and not make this stat block too long, because where's the fun in that, I think we could go in and say that he also gets this extraordinary reaction, costs 2 actions again. And we're gonna say Vecna regains 1. Vecna can take an additional reaction before the start of his next turn. So what this does is basically that it allows him to recharge his counterspell or his Fell Rebuke and actually get more reactions, but it comes at the expense of legendary actions. It's not something he can do and also do 3 legendary actions. So I think with this addition to his stat block, we get something where we're still gonna be able to counterspell more than would normally be humanly possible. We still get to do more, but we get some options there, and it's not just about shutting down spellcasters, and it's still not 3 times per round, it's only 2 times per round. with all these changes, I think that we've created a Vecna stat block that is power level wise, of course, stronger than the original Vecna, because it does have more hit points, it does have more AC, it does have some survivability tricks that the other one didn't have. But the most important thing we have here is that we have something that is more dynamic, probably more fun for the characters to play against, because they're not going to get just wiped away with Rotten Fate or countered to hell with Dread Counterspell. Instead, they actually get to interact a bit more with Vecna. Vecna gets to have more dynamic action options in combat, and he also gets to target more different saving throws, so you can target intelligence saving throws, stuff like that. And he gets, of course, a lot more spells. So I'm overall pretty satisfied with this stat block. I'm going to go through it and see if there's some wording issues we need to fix, and then I'll be publishing the stat block in a link down below, so you can find that in the description. It's going to be linking to our Patreon over at patreon.com/Eventyr, where we of course put out weekly encounters and a lot of other D&D stuff, polls for voting on videos, and just generally have a community where you can ask questions about running D&D. So if you want to check out the Patreon, you can also of course sign up, but you will not need to be a patron to get this stat block in particular. So that's basically the video. I hope you like what we've done here in the video. Please like, subscribe, all that YouTube mumbo jumbo. And beyond that, there's not a whole lot left to say, except thank you so much for watching, and I hope that I'll see you in the next video.